Hello, welcome once
Hello.
again to Pale Blooms and Beyond. Thank you for joining us. Leicester-born singer-songwriter Kevin Hewick was part of the early roster on Factory Records. In fact, he recorded a couple of early tracks with ex-members of Joy Division prior to becoming New Order. Kevin recorded for Cherry Red Records in the early 80s. Afterwards, he's released recordings on various labels, including Sorted, Pink Box, and his own Botheration label. Mr. Hewick has been a tireless live performer, including several tribute concerts and support shows in Brussels, Norway, Germany, as well as his native England. Since the new millennium, Kevin has been found collaborating with many artists and groups including Italian collective Unfolk, Jackie Leven, Subterraneans, and a band he formed with Sally Barker in 2011, Liberation Doll. Well, welcome, Kevin.
Thank you.
All right. Let's talk about your upbringing and childhood in Leicester.
Well, I'd say it was what we'd call typical working class. My parents, both real hard-working people. My dad worked mostly as a milkman, and he cleaned windows, so he did a lot of quite hard manual work. And my mum worked in my sort of childhood years up to when she retired. She worked mostly as shop assistant. She worked in a chemist and then in a big department store and then a small supermarket. So I was an only child. My parents were from quite big families. My dad had 5 brothers. My mum had 4 brothers. So they came from, quite lively families. And so I was the only child, and I was kind of different, you could say. I don't think I was like the other kids. I was kind of in my own dream.
Right.
You find like-minded people along the way, especially as you get older. But I was kind of like I was perhaps regarded by some people as a bit odd. And my dad was very much into sports. He'd been a boxer, he'd played football and cricket. He'd been in cricket teams, like where he worked. He was in the cricket team. And I think he was disappointed I wasn't like that at all.
Mm.
I just didn't relate to it.
Yeah.
What interested me, it turned out, was music.
Mm-hmm.
Right from when I was very young, I started getting very interested in music. And I mean, there's no hiding how old I am now. I'm 66 next birthday, so not in the first flush of youth at all. And of course, that gave me the right age to grow up alongside phenomenon like the Beatles happening. I remember from about 5 years old, I was very grabbed by the Beatles, who were a new thing then.
Mm-hmm.
And the Beatles paralleled a lot of my growth as a person, because by the time they broke up, I was 13. And so I grew up alongside them. And as they became more experimental and more broader in what they did, I kind of grew with them. I mean, for example, when I was 10, they were doing stuff like Sergeant Pepper and Strawberry Fields Forever. And I thought it was fantastic. And it was the right moment, you know, and my mind just grew into it. It just grabbed me so much. And it's hard to describe to somebody now that we're so saturated with different musics and sounds and so on. Just what a phenomenal thing all that was.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, you were hearing the unheard, or if it had been heard, it was being assembled in a certain way. And then as what you would call, I don't know, psychedelia and rock happened, it was just perfect timing. So I became really excited by things like Cream, and you got things like Hendrix coming out and all that. So I was very interested in Bob Dylan right from when I was about 9 years old. And much of that I have to thank my mum's youngest brother, my Uncle Joe, who was only 6 years older than me and was kind of like a big brother figure rather than an uncle. And Joe just bought records all the time. He worked in a hosiery factory in Leicester, which was a big employer in Leicester. And later on, he was a postman. And I think he must have spent all his wages on records.
On records. Well, you
so I heard all this stuff quite early on.
You got your first guitar when you were 6 years old.
Yes, I did, but I didn't learn to play it. The story I often tell is I saw the Beatles on television, and I was especially enamored of John Lennon.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And as he held up the guitar, you know, as he held the neck, I thought that's all you did. And you went like that, and the music came out. Well, that was true, but I hadn't worked out the bit about pressing on the frets and the shapes of chords and scales. So when Lennon did that, I just thought that's all you did. So I was really disappointed when this guitar didn't do it. I lost interest. And another, I've often repeated this story. Another thing was, in the end, my parents said about my cousin Joanne, they said, Joanne's interested in playing guitar and you're not bothering with it. Can we give it to Joanne? And I went, yeah, give it to Joanne. This must have been when I was about 7 or 8. And then Joanne got it and smashed it. So she was ahead of Hendrix, Townsend, Kurt Cobain, all smashing the guitar. Phoebe Bridgers, all of them. all the guitar smashes of history. Right up to Phoebe Bridgers.
Well, do you remember the first single or album that you got?
The first single I got that I wanted, I was bought things. Yeah. I can remember things like getting from my granddad a thing called, I don't think you had them in America, they were called Pinky and Perky. They were 2 little singing pigs. And they had a record called What Have We Got, What Have We Got? We Got Music. And you found out the single went at 45 RPM, of course, and if you took it down to 33, these little high piggy voices became slowed down. You could hear it was just guys singing, and they just sped up the tape, obviously. And that was a very disillusioning moment, really. But the first record, so they're going like, what do we got? What do we got? We got music. And if you say, what have we got? What have we got? We've got music. So that's what happened there. But when I was 8, I got a record player, a Dan set as we called them, mono record player. And the first single that I really wanted and got was Nancy Sinatra, These Boots Are Made for Walking.
Oh, okay.
That's a very credible start. Especially as well because the B-side was the brilliant The City Never Sleeps at Night, which is it's all prime Lee Hazelwood stuff, you know.
Yes, Lee Hazelwood.
So I was pretty hip, really, getting that. And it's been great to see Nancy being so outspoken on Twitter in modern times, and she's still very out there and aware of things. And you know, she's like the odd thing I've sent her on Twitter, so that's great. Of course, she gets thousands of people, but how cool, Nancy Sinatra liking you on Twitter. That's good, isn't it?
Right, exactly.
Very excited as well when David Crosby's liked anything I've put, or even commented a couple of times on things I've said. So getting Nancy Sinatra and David Crosby on Twitter reminds me that Twitter has been a good thing, despite what's happening now. So anyway.
Right. You can make connections with people. You're right.
Yeah,
That's
you
true.
can, but
Yeah.
it seems to be getting ruined at the moment.
Yeah, you're right. Well, what bands did you like as a teenager?
As I got older, really broad taste.
Yeah.
I very much became a big fan of things like Led Zeppelin, and I mentioned Cream and Hendrix, and the whole Crosby, Stills and Nash thing. I really loved it. And then they said they're adding this guy called Neil Young, and I thought, what do they need this Neil Young for? Because I had no idea who he was. I remember thinking, what do they need Neil Young for? They're great. They don't need him. And then I heard, this must be 1969 on the radio, I heard Cinnamon Girl by Neil Young and Crazy Horse, and I was like, wow, that was it. Neil Young was it. And he still is. So things have stayed with me like from there, Crosby and Neil Young, and things I've mentioned like Dylan. Dylan always was an enthusiasm, and I grew to love Joni Mitchell.
Oh, yeah.
And Leonard Cohen, of course. And yeah, I heard loads of things and loved loads of things. I got, is it credible again to say this? I got very into prog rock, as they call it. And I liked things a lot like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and Yes. I became really loved Yes.
Right.
And of course I started getting to concerts with my dad. When I was like 13, my dad would go with me to see these things. So we started seeing things.
Yeah.
The earliest one we went to actually was Rory Gallagher and Taste.
Oh.
And Weissman's Coliseum. But Rory Gallagher, of course, that was, talk about fantastic for your first ever proper rock concert. That was pretty amazing because Gallagher was phenomenal. And another early one we went to was Derek and the Dominoes, Eric Clapton.
Okay.
Of course, the Derek and the Dominoes only ever did a handful of dates in the UK, the one tour. So we're very lucky to see them. And saw things like Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Traffic and Pink Floyd, and in those first couple of years, Yes, all those sorts of things. So that was like, you go in and into like 14, 15, 16 years old sort of time.
Okay.
Things like Bowie happened, and I was very aware of Bowie and T-Rex, and I was a bit of a prog rock snob, and kind of thought I was into something a bit on a higher level than that, which is pretty laughable, particularly with Bowie, because you can't get a higher level than Bowie, in my opinion, now. But of course, it was an area where you didn't have the money to buy records. And so records were few and far between. And like hearing them from my uncle was a big thing. Also, what records your friends got, you tended not to get them, because if somebody had got an album, we were all around each other's houses playing them to death. So, for example, I had a friend called Paul, and he was a big Mark Bolan and T-Rex fan. Yeah. So I didn't buy the T-Rex things at the time, because you heard them all the time at Paul's house,
Mhm.
or he brought them round.
Mhm.
You know, he lived quite near here, and he'd come around with his T-Rex singles and albums. So, you know, I had a friend called Mick he only had one LP, and it was John Lennon's Imagine.
Really, really. The only one.
Imagine having a collection. Of course, you've got to start somewhere. So a one LP collection, but that meant all the time we heard John Lennon Imagine all the time.
Right. You got
It kind of drove me mad in the end. I can listen to John Lennon Imagine now, though I prefer Plastic Ono Band. That's a big album for me. Plastic Ono Band, the album before that,
right.
massive influence on me. Because to hear one of the Beatles sing so frankly about the end of the Beatles and the end of the dream, the whole theme of that album, and to go so stark from the extraordinary productions the Beatles have had, and of course they were going more rootsy in that kind of disintegrating phase of Let It Be and so on, and the Get Back sort of era. But then Lennon doing that album was very powerful. And the only trouble was, I felt at 13, he's going, the dream is over, the dream is over. And I was like thinking, the dream is over. You're 13.
Right.
And I think it had a funny effect on me. It made me feel like I'd seen it all and heard it all.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it made me kind of a built-in critic, and the influence of the music press. I was an avid reader of music press in the 70s, and that became very opinionated. And I don't know how well it compares to American music press, but of course we got writers like Nick Kent and Charles Shaar Murray and all them sort of people, and they had a big influence on what you thought, because you took it all in. And if they were down on something or critical of something, it could have a big influence on affecting its fortune. Or you could disagree with it, but it kind of affected things a lot. And it all became hypercritical, and yet, you know, I looked up to people. I mean, somebody like Townsend and The Who, you know, I kind of look up to them as almost they knew the answer, you know. I mean, all the classic stuff now, you know, don't look up to heroes and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, when is a rock and roll star ever going to tell you what you need to know?
Well, take us. You learned guitar in college, and then what was your first band?
My first band were called Life.
Okay. And what are your memories?
Well, Life was spoiled because one of the other guys in the band, Jamie Mills, was on guitar and organ. And really, me and Jamie vied to be the leader of Life and argued so much, it kind of ruined it, really. When I look back, we were really stupid. And I was probably the stupidest one. And Gwyn on the bass and Kevin on the drums were quite easygoing people, and almost baffled by our constant conflicts and arguments in rehearsal. And as well, Jamie did this silly instrumental thing that became our most popular number. And of course, I was very jealous of that. You know, it's typical. I'm writing these really serious, heavy songs, and Jamie does this silly thing on the organ, you know, and everybody loves it, and all the girls are dancing to it and stuff. And I'm thinking, what? So it was all like that. Really just kids arguing and squabbling and egos and things.
Yeah.
So it didn't last long.
Didn't last long.
And we were always regarded as like the group everybody sort of laughed at, I think, at school. There was a cooler band than us who were a year older, and they were much cooler. One thing did come through was Roy Harper. Roy Harper had a massive effect on me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how well known he is in the States.
Yes, yeah.
But Roy Harper, those albums as well were almost kind of like not just the music, but the kind of message and the lifestyle. I remember, I've often said this, I wanted to be Roy Harper. Mm-hmm. That was my fantasy, to be like Roy Harper. I thought he was so cool, you know. And those albums have worn well.
Yes.
They may be kind of hippie, but things like Flat Broke, Gone Berserk, and Stormcock. I mean, Stormcock's a masterpiece. Life Mask is very underrated. Yeah. Those albums have stood up really well, and I can still listen to them now and feel great things from them now.
Flat Baroque. I have Flat Baroque. That's a great.
Oh yeah, Flat Baroque. Yeah, great. And all the talking in between the songs and all the rolling a joint and stuff like that. It of course, as kids, we thought it was fantastic. You know, how cool is this guy? And, only last Sunday, I've seen him lots of times. I saw Nick, Roy's son, Nick Harper, who's incredible original on his own right and does an astounding show, about 2 hours, 45 minutes, virtuoso guitarist. And it's funny, that whole Harper connection in my life was first with Roy and now with Nick. Mm-hmm. And there's something that is quite shocking to say this, that's sort of threaded through 50 odd years of my life.
Right. Well,
it's shocking. So that's 50 years ago, but it doesn't seem 50 years. Anybody who's really young listening to this, I can assure you that the years will shoot by. I don't want to sound like the old man voice of doom, but the years will shoot by and you'll be going, oh my God, that's 50 years ago. It just happened.
Well, talk about when you sent a demo to Tony Wilson. How did you know Tony Wilson at that time?
Tony Wilson was known where I lived for his music show, So It Goes.
Okay.
And So It Goes was shown here in the Midlands, because we are literally flap in the middle of England, whereas, of course, Manchester's above us up north. And there, Tony was known for Granada Reports as well, their daily news program, whereas, of course, where I live, we got Midlands Today, and so didn't particularly see him and that. But So It Goes was put out here late on Saturday night. I actually remember once rushing from the pub, because, of course, it's a different world then. It was all very quaint. Pubs, you know, closed at 10:30 and stuff or whatever. And I remember rushing home on the bus early to see So It Goes, because he'd got the Sex Pistols on. And you'd heard so much about the Sex Pistols, but you couldn't hear them. They had no records out or anything. So the first time I saw and heard the Sex Pistols was presented by Tony Wilson on So It Goes, August 1976.
Tony must have liked what he heard on that demo.
He said he thought it. I mean, I've got no proof of these things, but he did say it. He said he thought I was the best British songwriter since Elvis Costello, which of course went to my head incredibly. Tony would say things like that to you, and you'd go, "Oh wow!"
Yeah.
I mean, nobody else thought it, but he thought it. So.
Well,
of course, he was right.
Right. Well, of course.
Well, he was right, but I didn't prove that for many, many years. The big mistake was that the big flaw in this brilliant plan was that I didn't make the records then that justified all this. I didn't break through, and I didn't get it right, and I didn't edit or produce myself right, and I did a lot of things now that make me absolutely cringe. I'm quite embarrassed by them.
Well, he
You know,
he saw your potential. He saw your potential, I would say.
oh, the potential was there, but it was misguided, misdirected, and most of all, the responsibility for that is most of all my own.
Yeah.
I don't understand the things I did and said. Some of them are just so stupid, and obviously so uncommercial. And I don't know, you know. I mean, I got a lot of criticism. I got a lot of bad music press. I mean, the music press were big here then. You could get about, I don't know, about 10 things weekly, from smash hits through to obviously NME, Melody Maker Sounds, Record Mirror, Disc, so on, so on. But every single one of them, in the end, I would get bad reviews or ignored. And it was literally that sad, going to the local newsagent, buying this pile of papers and magazines and scouring them for any review if you had a record out, and then if you got reviewed, it was bad. I mean, it was quite crushing. And of course, I didn't call myself a fantastical name, you know, like Adolph Morrissey or whatever he is. Right. I didn't call myself some silly name or anything. I was just Kevin Hewick. So you saw your own name, and you saw all these people saying this guy is rubbish. Yeah. So it hurt, and it had an accumulative effect. It ruined my confidence. And I'm afraid instead of rising to it, my judgment became even more blurred and confused. And as well, Tony, fantastic and inspirational, and yet he didn't direct me very well. Or, you know, let's say he didn't handle me correctly. Okay. I mean, later on, he became more exasperated and bad-tempered, and that wasn't the way to get me to respond. No, me either. I don't think it's a good way for anyone. We'll talk about the couple of songs you recorded with Martin Hannett and Graveyard Studios. Talk about that. Where'd the name come from? Was it an actual graveyard, or where did that come from? I know why they called it that. Actually, when you went to it, it looked like an ordinary house. There was nothing to tell you, and you went down into the basement, and it was very small. But they had a control room and a live room. I mean, I say small, but you know, got in a drum kit, keyboards and guitar amps and things. But I don't know why it was called that. Well, and my experience of it was arriving and leaving, and I never went back again. Same with Cargo in Rochdale. And Cargo was bigger. I remember stupid things like, I thought Cargo was a mess. There was literally beer cans and fish and chip papers on the floor from who'd been in before. So there was just trash on the floor and stuff. And I was like, this is Cargo? Because I'd got like the Joy Division things, and I'd got Gang of Four and all those things that recorded at Cargo. It's quite famous. And, you know, you're expecting something, wow. And instead it was like I'm not knocking anybody, but it was kind of like a dump, you know. I was kind of, this is Cargo. Well, I don't want to offend anybody connected with Cargo, but I have met people connected with Cargo, and they're nice people and everything, so I don't want to offend anybody. Well, go back to that recording session. One of the tracks, A Piece of Fate, with the surviving members of Joy Division. It was only a month after Ian had died. Ian, did you get any kind of feel or of the mood of the surviving members at that time? Did you get any kind of feedback or at all? How they were feeling? I did get some, but they weren't really. They didn't seem really in the mood for opening up about it. I was an outsider, so I remember trying to bring things up.
They didn't
I
really want
think
to talk.
I think now it was too soon. It was
Right.
too soon, and
Right.
it was kind of like the atmosphere was, I think, with them was very difficult. It was like, what do we do now? What do we do now? You know, I mean, you could do anything, couldn't you? You could break up the band, literally, go your
Right.
separate ways and call it a day. They didn't. They had decided that because I was told the name was going to be New Order that day. All that had happened within the first month. The decision to carry on, the decision to become New Order, so on. You know, it was said quite straightforwardly. Well, we've always said if one person left, of course they called it Leven rather than, then it wouldn't be Joy Division anymore. So they'd already decided things like that. But I did perhaps be upset with Bernard. He was very quiet.
Mm-hmm.
Peter Hook, to me, came over as like the MD, the musical director. He was strong that day, and he did try to direct it. You know, I kind of made a connection with him that day that I didn't make with the others.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still in contact with him now, and I still see him from time to time. And actually, Peter would have been good, perhaps guiding me and producing me if he hadn't been obviously so busy with his own destiny. He had a huge task, an uncertain task then, of course, which turned into New Order and everything they did.
We'll talk. What happened at the live show in 1981, a factory quartet, where the audience got so aggressive? What happened?
What happened was that was on the Roy Harper tour,
Mm-hmm.
and half his band,
Mm-hmm.
Andy Roberts on guitar and Preston Heyman on drums, had gone off for the weekend on a boat, and they were late back, and the show was delayed, and then at one point they were going to not have me on at all, and then they decided to put me on, and I was pretty stupid, and you don't hear that I'd had about 20 minutes of screaming abuse from the audience, and I answered back and said stupid things. I'm really embarrassed by it. Tony should have never put it out on a record. He heard it. I think he was thinking, I've called it, it's like my metallic KO, like Iggy and the Stooges, with the beer glasses breaking and light bulbs and things, and people throwing vegetables and stuff. It wasn't that bad. But, you know, so it was from metallic KO to acoustic KO. But I haven't heard it for years. I wouldn't want to listen to it. I don't recommend anybody listening to it. Don't listen to it.
Don't listen.
I mean, Tony was completely wrong. I gave him the tapes like a fool, and I'd put on them like notes like go into 15 minutes, whatever seconds, and there's a really good version of this song. Of course, he put that tape on, heard all the abuse and swearing, and went, great, this is art. This is confrontational art. The artist confronts the audience. No, it was just bad. It's just bad.
Bad choice by
awful.
Tony. Bad choice.
It was awful, and it was one of the experiences that really broke me in the end. You know, when you get loads of things like that going on and on.
Yeah. Well you were.
I mean, in the end, I had like a breakdown. In the end, I couldn't stand it anymore.
Yeah. You, in '83, Cherry Records, Cherry Red.
Cherry Red. Well, Tony had got bored with me, I think, and he'd got the hacienda going, which I didn't relate to at all. And I don't really relate to it now. I don't, you know, it was what was it? It was like a disco, but you can't call it a disco because it wasn't. It was a disco that wasn't a disco. And yes, some great things came out of it, and I can understand people had a fantastic time there and all that, but I never went to it. As Tony got wrapped up in it, he lost interest in things like me. I was one of the things that fell by the wayside.
Back when you were with Cherry Red, Feathering the Nest, that single, how do you think that turned out?
That's one of the few things from that era that I think stands up. I think it could be a better version. I keep saying I'm going to re-record some of these things. That needs a nice double bass and cool drums, like, you know, done with brushes and jazzy. But the chord structure's amazing. I don't understand how I came up with it. And the song is really good. The video is unspeakable because it wasn't my idea and I felt a fool doing it. The less said about the video, the better. Why did I even bring it up? Now people will be going, well, let's see this video. What's so bad about it? Anyway, Cherry Red were more like a record label than factory. And then when I got with Cherry Red, again, I happened to hit Cherry Red at a time where a lot was happening. Some of it was good and then not so good. For example, Ben Watt and Tracy Thorn got together, everything but the girl, but then of course they went to Warner Brothers, they left the label. You know, I think it was quite overnight as I understood it. So you know what I mean? There's all these events that are outside of you that go on, and that's stupid. It's a Nice Day, It's a Fine Day record by Jane as well. They were crazy about that. And I was crazy about it in another way. I thought it was rubbish. I still think it's rubbish. So stuff like that was happening. And again, I didn't fit into it. I related a lot to Tireless in Gaza.
Right, yes.
Tireless in Gaza. Oh, brilliant, brilliant. And I really liked being with them. I liked them as people. I related to them like I related to Section 25. So you always find somebody in the midst of this chaos who you go, oh, yeah.
You can relate.
And I wish I mean, Kevin Coyne was on the label at that time, but I didn't get to meet him until years later. I wish I'd have met Kevin Coyne back then, because Kevin Coyne was he's from Derby, which isn't far from here. And Kevin Coyne was totally my sort of artist that I related to, what he was doing and saying and his creativity and his moods. And he's a formidable man. I was kind of a bit scared of him, to be honest, but yeah. But I didn't meet him.
Yeah, you can. I said later on you contributed a song to his tribute album later on.
Yeah.
Too. Yeah, you did that. You worked several tributes.
That was through Jackie Leven, another great friend. Jackie Leven connected me up to that. And of course, a big parallel thing to the Factory and Cherry Red era was Jackie and Dole by Dole. Dole by Dole were a very important band to me. I think Tony in particular didn't like my connection with them because I hung out with them a lot and stayed with them in London a lot. They lived in a squat and I used to stay there in Maida Vale, and I did quite a lot of gigs with them, and it was kind of unfactory, you know.
Back to the Cherry Red era, I want to hear about this. The Sound have always been one of my favorite bands for as long as I can remember. Yeah. How did you and Adrian meet?
Well, I saw the Sound as a fan, just like somebody paying a ticket. So I saw them live, and I rather like Joy Division and Dole by Dole. They had that intensity I liked, and they were another band where the songs really got to me, and you couldn't deny Adrian's passion and vision. But actually meeting them, I've met a guy called John Hollingsworth, who I'm still great friends with. And John was student committee at entertainment committee at Kingston Polytechnic.
Mm-hmm.
And he booked me to be with the Sound. And when I met them, Adrian knew who I was. He was quoting lyrics at me, and he's going, let's do some recording together. That's what Adrian was like. So that was an amazing night, because I was excited at being on the same bill as the Sound. And not only that, they were kind of going, oh, Kevin, we want to work with you. And amazing. And John actually went on from the Kingston Polytechnic thing to be an A&R at Cherry Red. And John kind of was what got me to cross over from Factory to Cherry Red. And then John went to Warner Brothers, and he's been you name it, he's been a chef, a photographer, a poet, you name it. We did a tour together with Patrick Fitzgerald and Anne Clark called Ghost of Individuals. We were quite ahead of our time with that, this kind of traveling poetry, music thing. And I'm still connected up with John now. And the Adrian Borland thing and the Sound
Mm-hmm.
connected me up with a lot of people who are still very good friends. Particularly, he's got friends like Audrey and Rob Eade and David Hawkins. And I'm still very good friends with those people. Very good friends.
Well,
Audrey,
talk about
my spiritual advisor.
Can you remember working with the band on that 4-track EP? This cover keeps reality on.
Because it was an all-night session. Well, we did 2 sessions, because we did it once. I did that off my own back with them, and because I was frustrated, because Tony wasn't putting me in a studio with Factory. You know, each month would turn to a year or something, and nothing was happening. So I thought, I'll record something myself. Did it with the Sound, and of course, the famous thing Tony said was, "I'm not putting something out by a fucking London band on Factory, never." He was completely negative. And as it was, I had to rewrite the lyrics and things anyway, because of New Order's confusion, which seemed as if it was the other way around. It would have looked like as if I'd have lifted it from New Order when I did it first. Anyway, tumbleweed blowing through the deserted Midwestern town. There was a tape of that given to Tony Wilson. Then I had New Order doing that, and I was like, oh my God. It's only a little bit of a resemblance, but of course it's going to reflect badly on me. So I rewrote it and went in with the Sound again a couple of years later, and we did it all again.
In the late 80s, you taught adults with learning disabilities. Was that rewarding?
I ended up doing that for, it's a bit shocking to say this, but I ended up doing that for 32 years.
Yeah. Was that rewarding?
Very.
Yeah, I imagine.
A very extraordinary experience. I saw the end of an old era, and I saw a more enlightened way of relating to people. I loved it. It wasn't a job. To me, it was like becoming part of a family unit. And the places I worked at primarily 3 places for quite long periods of time. You know, one was 10 years, one was 12, another one about 9 years. So, and some of them, there was a crossover of people as well. So, I mean, some people I worked with for about 21, 22 years.
Mm.
the same people who were the people who we supported. So of course you grow very close to them.
Mm-hmm.
And we were a small group as well. Yeah, I ended up with a thing with 5 men, and 2 of them have passed away now, one of them this year. And it's odd to think of them as gone, because they were such amazing characters and so amazing to work with. And we had a lot of fun, a lot of laughs, and we had a lot of difficult times as well.
Mm-hmm.
It suited me with music. It was kind of like working in something that was constantly like in a flux and a creative situation.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just people with an alternative way of seeing the world, an alternative intelligence.
Right.
So absolutely a privilege to spend time with them and experience life with them and see life through their eyes.
And I was going to say that was probably a bit of therapeutic for you too, as well.
Oh, absolutely, because after Factory and Cherry Red, I was utterly burned out. I was a recluse. I still lived with my parents, which was a big mistake. And I became extremely reclusive. I mean, I wouldn't step out of the house for days on end. I didn't see people. And there wasn't the computers or the internet or the mobile phones and so on then. So you really shut down. I gave up playing music, performing. I gave up everything. I sometimes refer to dust on the guitars, and I mean it. You could write your name in the. I remember writing my name in dust on one of the guitars because I hadn't picked it up for months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then I got moved to do it again, and the world's slowest ever comeback. That never came back from something that I never was there in the first place. I don't know if it's disappointing or not. It's the bulk of the work I've ever done.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say to anybody, there's a lot of interest in Factory and Cherry Red and that era.
Mm-hmm.
But the stuff I've done since, say, 2012, when I bought one album out, and since then, the last decade, the last 10 years, is really what I want or wish people would hear and judge me on.
Mm-hmm.
That's it, what I've done in the last 10 years. So quite late in life, in my 50s, in my 60s. Doesn't fit the rock and roll script at all. I don't fit the thing about somebody with a load of greatest hits or something, or some cult appeal from the past. It's now. It's about now, and it's about things done in recent years. When I play a set, I'll often be doing songs written in the last 5 years. Nothing of anything from before. I do things, but I'm saying, you know, you could see me, say, do a 45-minute set on some bill, and you'll go, what was all that from? You know, and the answer is from the last couple of albums, from the last sort of 5 odd years. You know, that's it. Very in the now, very of now.
You released in '93 a cassette album in an open air surgery.
Oh, wow, you've done your research.
Yeah, that's what
Wow.
I said. I've got questions about your later material. What does the title mean in an open air surgery?
It's taken from the Haystack song. And what does it mean?
Yeah. Haystack.
Haystack, I mean, I can say how I wrote it, but it sounds odd. But these things all sound odd. I wrote Haystack after seeing the film The Days of Wine and Roses. And there's a scene with Jack Lemmon and Lee Remick where they kind of fall into a haystack, and because they're recovering alcoholics, and they, what is it? Is it a dad's farm or something? They go on and they're cleaning up, you know, but he ends up hiding bottles of vodka in the hay and stuff. You get the idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I just rambled. This thing just came out from seeing this film and the open air surgery about, like, I suppose, them healing back to nature, you know, back to the farm and back to the family and the, you know, security and stuff. And of course it doesn't last. It's ruined. And I shouldn't give it away, should I? The end of the film is excruciating because in the end he does make it through, but she doesn't.
Yeah.
She ends up an alcoholic forever, and eventually it will kill her, you know. And it struck a chord with me.
Talk about the Firebug Comfort Zone sessions. What are those? What were those?
They were a series of things on Sunday afternoons, and it was mostly acoustic singer-songwriters, and I kind of presented it in, I think the fashionable word now is curated.
Okay.
You curate a festival, don't you? Or you curate an evening. And so, yeah, put together interesting people. That's some years ago. They were good. And Firebug is a really big place in the centre of Leicester. It used to be, back in the 19th century, the headquarters of the lamplighters, the fellows who went around with the big, like, tapered end candle end things and lit the gas lamps in the city.
Yes.
And that's where they have their HQ. So it's an old building with an interesting history and still a thriving venue now. It's quite a big place. It's got a big upstairs area and a big bar downstairs. We used to do it downstairs.
Mm-hmm.
I also got into being the compere for what we called Leicester Acoustic Club, which was long running night. They would run in different venues. And the Musician in Leicester, which is a real crucial venue for me, a lifeline. And I did that for 11 years. We did Monday nights, and that was an open mic. So anybody could walk in and perform on whatever instrument, singing, backing tracks, or we had the odd poet and comedian. Well, no, the comedians were a disaster. Anyway, comedians were, we had some comedians once from Leicester Comedy Festival, which is a big comedy festival, and said never again. They were offensive and just disgusting. But anyway, I did that for 11 years, and all kinds of people would show up and perform at all kinds of levels, people who were utter beginners. Of course, if you've got an interesting idea, you've got an interesting idea. That's all that matters.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think technique matters that much. You know, you can have a technically brilliant musician and you can have somebody with an interesting idea who isn't technically brilliant, but the person with the interesting idea can be more interesting.
I mentioned earlier, we talked a little bit about you've been involved in some tributes. Nice that you paid tribute to Adrian, keeping his memory alive a couple of times, and
well, also, there's a big thing in in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
Adrian himself told me. He said, I can play in a pub in London and I get about 40 people. He says, and I can do the Paradiso in Amsterdam and get 800 people. So he was really, really popular there, and the sound were really popular. And there were people there who were very enthusiastic about doing tribute shows, and his dad came to them, and people connected with him, played at them. People at that end, in the Dutch end. And then Audrey, Eid particularly, and I set up doing something in London. That's a place called the Cavern, which is a place he liked to go drinking. He loved it. Where we played on the stage there, said this was the table where he used to sit, you know, actually where the stage area was. So really connected to him. And there it got more encompassing. You know, things like Mike Dudley appeared on drums, the actual drummer with the sound, and things like that. And you know, it was, you know, quite emotional and felt quite close and connected. And then I did an atrocious set there. The last time I did it, I can't get over how bad it was. No excuse. But I was kind of stressed out at the time because not an excuse, but I had quite a difficult time the last sort of 2.5 years of my dad's life. He had dementia. And when I look back, when we did that last one that I was involved with in London, you know, show for Adrian, I really wasn't what we'd call match fit to do it. And I tried to do too much. And it was too much of a strain at the time of what was happening. And actually, my dad died within about a month of it. So that's where we were at. And it was a hell of a time looking at it in all ways. You also get into this thing. It's great to do, and yet,
I can.
You know, you think, well, what does it? You know, I don't want to look like trying to get reflected glory or anything just because I had a small connection with this legendary person. I've done Joy Division things, done a couple of Joy Division things with lineups just in Leicester. We're not, you know, nothing commercial either. We've actually done it for charity. We've done a suicide awareness charity. We've done it for that, and we put the work in and learned the sets and did it. One favourite of mine was that we did a lineup, and the drummer was a great guy called Jordan Ross, and so we called it. His nickname Jord, so we called it Jord Division. That's what was funny anyway. So Jord Division.
I get it.
You know, yeah, just jokey, and you know, I don't want anybody thinking, oh, he's trying to ride on their coattails of reflected glory. No, not at all. It was done at Leicester and done for charity.
Let's talk briefly about your solo material, starting with 2007 EP, That Side of You.
Oh, yeah.
Greenbelt Wanderer. That's a favorite of yours. What's the song all about?
Like a lot of things I do, it's about round here. I mean, Leicester and Leicestershire. Leicestershire is quite rural, but it's not like romanticized, like, you know, the Peak District or the Lake District, the more northern places, or the kind of beauty of Cornwall or Wiltshire and Glastonbury and all those places. So I think a lot about where I come from, because I was born in Leicester, and lived in Leicester all my life. So Greenbelt Wanderer is very much about the countryside quite near here. And if you saw it, it's not that romantic, and it's quite compromised with, I mean, especially political decisions. I mean, there's been attempts to, the little green belt we have, there's been attempts to build on it. There's some land for sale now between here and, I live about a mile from a place called Blaby that you hear me go on a lot about. And between here and Blaby, there's a rather unromantic strip of land, and it's up for sale at the minute, but it floods a lot. I don't know that anybody could build on it, but they're trying to sell it and they're trying to build on it. You know, all these things are kind of beleaguered.
Right.
So it's kind of bittersweet as well. It's kind of sad because it's a dwindling countryside and it's a compromised countryside, and it goes into environmental issues and so on.
Yeah.
And obviously we need building, we need growth, we need homes for people to live in, but it's all being done wrong. It's all being done wrong, and it's taking away the land. I mean, there's a particular problem in this country, obviously, because we don't have an enormous amount of space for the population we have. But then again, a lot of things here are owned, huge amounts of land are owned by the monarchy and by aristocracy. Privileges that come from skullduggery, double dealing, and Lord somebody who managed to subjugate the peasants or kill people, whatever, hundreds of years ago, and that's how they inherit it. And so you can tell I'm not very enthusiastic about that system.
No.
Not really.
Well, 2008's Keep Your Flipped Wigs On. I like that title.
That's a strange album. It's very eccentric. It is part of the show. It was a show with young actors. An old school friend of mine called Joe Simon asked me, would I write songs for a rock musical? And he wanted to parody things like things that were already parodies, really, like School of Rock and High School Musical and all these things. And I wrote it sometimes in the style of things, like some of it's meant to be like the Sex Pistols, or there's one that's meant to be like Neil Young and Crazy, or one's meant to be U2. So I don't know, in retrospect, was it a bit out of touch? It was, Jazz was similar age to me, so it was like two 50-year-old men with a bunch of teenagers doing a musical, and he's coming up with ideas and I'm coming up with songs that you'd say, well, even kids then, who'd relate to this old fogey stuff, you know, but we did it anyway. The show only did a few performances, and it started off brilliantly and got worse with each performance. Instead of better, it went the wrong way round. It went worse instead of better. And things got a bit, unfortunately, just like musical differences and bands breaking up, things got a bit fraught with me and Jazz. And he was going on this show's I'm gonna get it on at the Edinburgh Festival. There's an Edinburgh Fringe Festival, it's called. It's a big deal. And it's a platform that often things like comedians and theatre things can sometimes like use as a springboard to greater success. And he was going on at one point, well, I've got some people in Canada interested in putting on the musical. I thought, God, it's going to go Canada, USA. And none of this happened. And so there's this rather strange album with me trying to be Bono or something, or Neil Young or whatever I'm trying to be, or Johnny Rotten. It's rather weird and strange, but there's some interesting songs on it. But it was strange time, and it is a strange album. And I've kind of think it got me going in some ways, but it was a bit of a false start. And the real start was doing the later albums that came after it. I attempted an album after it that got scrapped. That's another thing that happens with me. There was an album I tried to do called "Don't Turn Off What's Turned On," and there are tracks that were recorded for it and ended up being scrapped. So there. That's the Great Lost Album. That's the Great Lost Album.
The Lost Album.
Yeah. That's the Lost Album.
Well, Doom Cloud from 2009. I have to say the cloud on the cover, the cover picture is pretty ominous. And I see like I can see a tornado dropping down any second.
It's a composite.
Yeah.
My friend Gary Knight, who does my website, he'd got the tornado image, and I'd got the image with the kind of church-like building with the cloth on like an altar. It's actually Glastonbury Tor, and it's one I took on Glastonbury Tor. And then he imposed the kind of doom cloud image.
Yeah.
And that album was actually recorded a few years before it came out. It was recorded between 2000 and 2003, but didn't come out till 2009.
Yeah.
And it's very stark. It's just me and a guitar mostly. And I didn't want any production at all. I didn't want any reverb. I didn't want nothing. So it's really bleak. And it was a bleak time as well. I've gone through a big breakup, and it was kind of like being lost.
Yeah, it was
And
a very personal album for you.
And I did it with a guy. I recorded it at a guy's house, Robbie Murphy, and Robbie was great fun. Amazing Irishman, very good songwriter and very good musician in his own right. And Robbie was going through some intense things, and the pair of us together, we did these sessions, and I feel a lot of Robbie in there. So you do hear him say rolling and stuff like that. You sometimes we kept little things on the tracks. And it's very sad about Robbie, because Robbie took his own life a few years later. And I've spent a lot of time with him doing that album and sprawling sessions. There's hours of stuff. And maybe in retrospect, I was proxy to things that maybe accumulated on him later and made him do what he did. But you never know, do you, with people? You never know. Everybody's got their burden, their cross to bear. But we'll look back and I think, oh my God, sometimes some of the things Robbie said and some of the things in those songs when we worked on them together, I just think, well, I feel very sad that I'm here and he's not, you know. He was a great character, lovely man.
Jumping ahead to Venetian Book of the Dead with Unfolk. Talk about how you met Alessandro Monti and how you recorded the album together.
He contacted me through MySpace in those days. He contacted me and told me about the project and that it was inspired by the vinyl factories between Mestre and Venice. Venice is obviously famous and picturesque, but along the great bridge that Mussolini built, Alessandro said it's the only good thing Mussolini ever did was this great long straight bridge that connects Venice with Mestre. Mestre is kind of like where all the what you'd call blue collar people live, all the people who work in factories, and, you know, that's where they actually live. But the factories have bad pollution and was a toxic environment, and many people developed cancer, including Alessandro's father. And Ricardo, the engineer, his mom and dad died of it. Many people lost family members through the cover-up of the pollution and the toxic fumes and so on. And so I said, well, that's such a powerful story. Surely you should write it. He said, well, I want the lyrics to be in English. He said, more people will understand in English and it will reach more people. And he wanted to work with me. And so I had the tracks, and on that album, I don't play any instruments. I am vocals and vocal melodies over the tracks they did. And I wrote the lyrics. And I did actually go over and record my vocals in the studio out in this fantastic rural studio outside Mestre. And had a great time. And we worked together again. In fact, there's an unreleased album. There's an album we did in 2016 that's never come out because, I'm sorry to say, we went full Roger Waters, David Gilmour. Total split over the direction of this music. And Alessandro has released his own version of the session, which I think is, I don't like the mix, I don't like what he did to them. And we've got a UK version that we keep meaning, we'll have to bring it out next year. Our version is 100 minutes long. So it's actually not just, it would be something like a triple vinyl album and a double CD. And our version has things like these big 20-minute instrumentals and things. I say our version, I mean Jim Tatlow, who also does a lot of my album designs, the covers and the booklet. Jim Tatlow plays on the Unfolk album that was recorded in Leicester in 2016. And there's a Jim Tatlow mix and an Alessandro Monti mix. And the Jim Tatlow mix is the good one. And that's why things are on Roger Waters and David Gilmour. I feel bad about it really, because Alessandro and I haven't spoke for quite a while. And you know these things happen. And you know some of the greatest bands in the world. In fact, we just mentioned one. You know, I mean, you've got like Waters and Gilmour. Well, the Beatles even the Beatles went, didn't they? You know.
Yeah.
So it happens, and it's happened to us. And then I kind of sound flippant, but Alessandro said it's as if you're enjoying this. When I said about Waters and Gilmour, he said it's as if you're playing that fantasy version of being like Roger Waters and David Gilmour, including Falling Out, like with Pink Floyd Falling Out. But I know I don't like that it's like that, and I think it's cost us doing more work together,
right? Doing
more things together. There was something special as a combination. I thought we wrote together very well. I think we were very good at writing together. It's sad that it's gone like it's gone.
Yeah.
Because I actually felt like we could write songs together somehow. I've attempted co-writing with quite a few people, and somehow it clicked with Alessandro. Really clicked.
Yeah. Well, jumping back to your solo material, 2012's All Was Numbered. Of course, the song Larry is about Larry Cassidy of Section 25.
Yes, I really love Larry. I've mentioned about
a little bit. Yeah, talk a little
early.
bit.
French jazz station on that album's about Larry Cassidy as well, about a weird night in Paris with Larry on the last Section 25 tour I did with him, where we did some European dates with him and Section 25 and Peter Hook. He'd ring me at like 2, 3 in the morning. We'd have long nocturnal talks, and just an extraordinary character. And it's still very obsessing about. It's so sad, you know. We talk about so many people who've died. It's like that Jim Carroll song, all the people who died, isn't it? You know, it is. It is like that.
Right.
And it's really, really sad because we mention these names.
Yeah. You've had your fair share of brushes with those people that have passed away, though. I don't know if so many other musicians have been running those circles or what have you, but you've had your share. You've definitely had your share.
I've been through some things in my life. Yeah. I've seen a bit too much of things that happen to people, and very close to home. Yeah. I've been through, and I've been through my own sort of demons, and somehow I'm here. I don't know why I'm here in some ways, because certainly there were times with drinking, with alcohol, I could have, you know, really gone under with that. I could have drank myself into illness, and mind you, maybe I have. I am diabetic. I have got a few health problems now, that's typical of my age, and maybe I have done some damage to myself. And on my local scene, Leicester, we just had a funeral on Friday. Paul Howe was a great promoter of folk music in Leicester. When folk music was kind of dead and gone, he brought it back. You know, in the 80s, late 80s, folk was a real nothing, you know, dead thing.
Yeah.
And Paul was an enthusiastic person who brought it back, and he was very supportive of singer-songwriters like myself. And we just had his funeral on Friday. And
yeah. Well, you've always had an affinity for folk music and folk musicians, because you've supported many over the years.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned Roy Harper, Martin Carthy. Fairport Convention, you know.
It did seem an odd combination, but you know, I remember I did a gig with Peter Hook and Revenge in London, and then I came back from that, and the next thing I did was Martin Carthy and Dave Swarbrick at the Spread Eagle in Leicester, a gig through Paul Howe, I just mentioned, whose funeral was on Friday. And so I would literally jump from doing something factory related with Hooky to being with Carthy and Swarbrick, which was a huge honour and amazing, they're amazing people to spend time with, and I really love it. I really love all that stuff, and I've been very lucky because I've seen and met, you know, legends like Carthy, Swarbrick, Davy Graham, Burt Yanks. I've seen them all, met them, sometimes played on bills with them, and it's kind of hard to believe now, you know. It's kind of, because again, with the exception of Carthy, a lot of them are gone now, or you know, or like Roy Harper. I don't know what's happening there now. I saw Roy's last London show in 2018, and he was great. But it's been quiet since. But he's in his 80s now, so obviously.
Yeah.
I saw David Crosby's last London show, also 2018, and I mean, Crosby's 81 now. He was 77, 78 then. And I believe he said now there'll be no more touring. You know, some of these great figures have survived, they've made it through, but they're now coming to the age where it may not be possible to travel anymore.
Yeah.
Again, I saw another one the other week. I saw Bob Dylan in Nottingham. I mean, and Dylan at 81 is still doing great work. I think Rough and Rowdy Ways is a modern masterpiece. Fantastic album. And it was an amazing thing to see him perform it. But he looked frail when he stepped out from behind the piano. He looked like a little old man. You know, and that's something that, I mean, I was hearing Bob Dylan. It's incredible to say this, but I mean, I was first aware of Bob Dylan in about 1966. It's incredible.
Right.
It makes me sound old, never mind him.
Right. Well,
but I remember hearing Blonde on Blonde in 1966, and I liked it. I mean, I was 9, so. But here we are with like almost. Funny enough, there's a Dylan album called Together Through Life. That's the one with Have You Ever Been to Houston on? And funny enough, Dylan has been through my life from when I was a little kid.
Yeah.
Just like the Beatles thing, you know, McCartney. Now you feel these things really strongly because from being a child, they've been part of the magic, you know. Yeah.
Well, your 2013, The Heat of Molten Diamonds.
That album does have my song about Jackie Leven on, Elegy for Jackie Leven.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
Well, that is very referential. It has lots of references to Jackie and connections. You could almost write an essay about that song with notes. You know, people say, well, it can't stand up very well as a song then if you have to explain it that much, you know. There you are, there's things in it, and you'll hear me sing something and you'll go, I refer to 100 grieving men, and you think, what's 100 grieving men? But it's something Jackie said about, he was involved with this thing, the men's movement, and he referred to being in a forest with these guys, and they told stories and shared things and went through a kind of primal scream kind of thing.
Yes.
And he said it was like 100 grieving men, and I put the image in there, you know. I did a live album with Jackie. I played bass and guitar with him on a live show. And he was thinking of a title for the album. I said, what about 100 grieving men? And he wasn't amused. I said, that's a title, Jackie. You said about the 100 grieving men. It's a great title for an album. He didn't use it. I thought 100 grieving men was a really good title. And it did come straight from the man himself. He was something else. Incredible. And he's incredibly underrated.
Right.
And it still stands for this. I mean, he's been gone 11 years now, and it's an utterly fantastic body of work. Brilliant musically, brilliant lyrics, and he was a brilliant guitarist and singer. And you know what? The world needs him. The world needs him. Mm-hmm. The world needs him as an artist. And it's nothing to do now with fashionability and, you know, all right, you can't bring back somebody who's 11 years dead. But of course, to me, he's not dead. He's very alive in my head and in my heart. So just like other people we mentioned, like Adrian and Larry, you know, very much so.
Yeah.
It all sounds like talking about people that have died and tragedy and stuff. But unfortunately, that's a big factor with me, and I feel very conscious of it.
Another track on that album, Almost Unseen, is a popular track.
Almost Unseen, you know, it's one of them things. I'm amazed I did it. I don't know how I did it. It's a bit like Feather in the Nest on Cherry Red. How did I come up with that chord sequence? Almost Unseen is like that.
Mhm.
That's about a couple of things, and quite, yeah, it's a moving song actually. I haven't played it live much lately.
Mhm.
What a cop out! It's actually, I find it difficult to play, and I find it difficult to play emotionally. In fact, I have trouble with some of the songs because they're so emotional, they're so deep. I have to relive so much in them that I have trouble performing them. Does that sound stupid? Perhaps it sounds stupid, but yeah, you could almost cry. Well, in fact, I'd actually cry. You could actually cry.
Did you want to talk a little bit about your 2016's Touching Stones, Tasting Rain?
Tasting Rain, yeah.
Talk about
Well,
Mill Lane and why it holds such a special place in your heart.
Mill Lane is a real place. Yeah, it's in Blaby, which is about a mile from where I am now. I'd like to live in Blaby, but I'm afraid the houses are too expensive. I live on the wrong side of the tracks in House Monsell, so because can't afford a house at Blaby. And Blaby's changed a lot, like a lot of places are. The recession and things have hit it as much as anything. I mean, it's hard to believe once there was things like a music shop there and all sorts, you know, that have gone, and things have changed, like a lot of small towns and villages in all over the world. I guess in the States, there's a lot of small towns where shops have closed and things have gone, you know.
Yeah.
Mill Lane is goes out into countryside, but it's where the, I'm afraid it's just a reference really to my my mother and my dad now as well, because Mill Lane is where the cemetery is. So it's really going to the cemetery to visit my mum, whose her ashes are buried there, and my dad's ashes are buried there. So there's a lot of references to all that kind of part of the world, and it's really to do with that place. You know, wait till you hear Unseen Lambs Are Bleating. That's an unrecorded song about a particular day. And I should record that song, because come on, a title like Unseen Lambs Are Bleating is good, isn't it? You know.
Yeah.
That was about being there. And you could hear there's fields nearby, and the lambs, you could hear them, but you couldn't see them.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a kind of eerie time of the day, going into dusk, and you heard the cries of the lambs, and yet you're in this place of the dead, you know, and the juxtaposition of new life, and yet what are those lambs gonna be? Where are they going? But you see, I've gone vegan a few years ago now, so so obviously to me, animals are, you know, I can't preach it to anybody else. You do what you want to do. I ate dairy for years. I ate meat for years. So, but I've not eaten meat for 30 odd years. I've not eaten fish for 20, and I've been vegan now for nearly 3. So there you go.
You're definitely a bigger man than I am, because I still eat my meat. So.
I loved meat. I loved the steak. I loved ham and gammon and bacon and chicken and turkey. I loved it all. I adored it. But there you are. It's gone. It's gone for me. Yeah. And that went 30 odd years ago. So
well,
no.
Well,
I can remember. And of course, you've got things that impersonate it, but
Uh-huh.
I still handle a lot of meat because of my dog, because of Smokey. He has chicken and ham and everything. So
Right.
the funny thing is, I'm still familiar with it as a thing.
Uh-huh.
There's ham in the fridge and there's chicken in the fridge, and I feed it to him.
Yeah.
I wouldn't inform. I mean, I know people have vegetarian dogs and vegan
Mhm.
dogs and cats and stuff, but I couldn't do it to him. He's
No.
16 now and he's lived all his life eating meat, so that's what he wants. And he's come over to me because he knows I'm talking about it.
You're
No,
talking
I'm
about
talking about you, don't you?
Does-
He knows.
yeah.
I'm
Is he
talking
gonna?
about Smokey.
Oh,
Are you
is
going to
Smokey-
appear? Oh, I thought he was going to appear
He's
then.
gonna make a. He's gonna make a cameo. Is he gonna make a
He
cameo?
can't make an appearance. Come here. Here. Here he is.
Hi, Smokey. Hi, Smokey. Hi, Smokey. Does he hear me? Smokey.
Go on then. I'll let you be free.
Okay.
Sorry, mate.
Speak.
Just
Is
wanted
that?
to appear on the show. Yeah, you've appeared on a TV show.
Here's a segue. Is Smokey the dog in Billion Pebble Beach?
Smokey is the dog on Billy and Pebble Beach.
Okay.
You're very
I like-
well researched indeed.
Yeah, I like that. Your dog, Smokey, and your dad. I like that. Let's jump ahead then to you said Driven by Love, Driven by Hate was your White album.
Yeah, because it's like the length it's 79 minutes, so it's like a double album. I think the White album's 83 minutes. I think it's 4 minutes shorter, and it's got such a variety of styles. And I felt like there was a side 1, 2, 3, 4. There is really a side 1, 2, 3, 4. You can divide it into 4 or 5 songs a side.
Mm-hmm.
There's 17 songs on it, and because of its length, going on over an hour and a quarter, and I felt like the variety in there was really strong. And the White Album was my first ever album when I was 11 at Christmas 1968. It was the first LP I ever had.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm probably being pretentious, really. People go, God, he must be a genius. He's made an album like the Beatles' White Album, and then you'd hear it and say, it's nothing like it. Nowhere near as good, obviously.
Turn me on.
Actually, the White Album would have been better if they'd have left off Obla-dee, Obla-da.
Right.
And
Turn me
really,
on.
I think Paul is a brilliant songwriter. He's a brilliant person, but some of his ideas were getting a bit silly.
Yeah.
It's like Maxwell Silver Hammer on Abbey Road, please. You know.
Right.
There's no need for it. Though Driven by Love, Driven by Hate has an Obla-dee, Obla-da song in Arizona Highways. Total
Arizona
nonsense.
Highway. Yeah. From the magazine.
Yes, from the magazine Arizona Highways. That's a childhood memory. I had a teacher at school. This would be about 1968. And she bought in a load of copies of Arizona Highways. She'd been to the USA and got a load of the magazines. Because, of course, in this country, people don't know Arizona Highways.
Right.
But it's quite a well-known magazine. It's still going, isn't it?
Yeah,
I think it's still going.
Yeah.
And Arizona Highways is quite a well-known magazine. And I was making up songs in my head. And that's the first song I ever made up was called Arizona Highways. So I finally recorded it X years later in my 50s. So I was 11. So all I got was Arizona Highways, Arizona Highways, the Arizona Highways, tonight. And the tonight was very important. Because when you're 11, you go tonight, and it could mean anything. It sounds quite rock and roll, doesn't it?
Uh-huh.
So not a lyrical masterpiece, really. Arizona Highways, Arizona Highways, Arizona Highways, tonight. It's that tonight that kind of it gives you the edge, the feeling of excitement. Anything is possible. So I do name check Lana Del Rey on there, but of course that would be a more recent addition than me and when I was 11 in 1968. The reference to Lana is a contemporary reference. I wasn't a prophet or anything seeing into the future. I wasn't the Nostradamus of rock and roll, you know.
Oh Lord. Well,
I love her as an artist as well.
yeah.
I think she's really underrated.
Yeah.
She's brought out some amazing stuff in recent years. Very prolific.
Yep.
It's great work. It's great work.
Another track on there: a robe, a razor, and a bowl. Talk about
a robe, a razor, and a bowl. Yeah.
Yeah. Talk about what this song is all about.
Well, Buddhists will probably start throwing things at the screen and say that's totally inaccurate. But I saw this thing about it being the articles of faith, that the monk travels through the world owning nothing but the robe to wear, the razor to shave with, and the bowl for eating and drinking and begging for alms, ALMS.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously it's poetic license, because in fact they have 3 robes to alternate with washing and having a clean robe to wear. So you have 3 robes. They also have a girdle. I do refer in the song to wearing a girdle of stars. They have a girdle beneath the robe. So it's kind of poetic license to strip it down even more to the robe, the razor, and the bowl. But it just appealed to me as an image. I've got a thing about Buddhism, which I actually got from Larry Cassidy of Section 25, because Larry was very interested in Buddhism, and we talked about it quite a lot. But probably Buddhists will go, that is absurdly inaccurate. What utter rubbish, you know. So, you know, I mean, it's like I've done a song about meeting some Mormon sisters called Gold Plated on the last album I did, Never Give Up on a Song. And I gave Alan a lower copy of the album with that on. And I told him, a Gold Plated, I said, I don't want you to be offended. It's about meeting 2 Mormon sisters. And he laughed at the title. He got the title about the golden plate. I don't know what he, perhaps never listened to the song. I don't know. And he had bigger things on his mind, as we know now. So, but he was very kind and very funny, and as you'd expect him to be. But probably again, Mormons would hear that song and look at the lyrics and say, that's complete, utter rubbish. You don't know anything about our faith. And probably Buddhists the same with robe, a razor, and a bowl. You know, rubbish, they'd say. You don't know what you're talking about. But that's the thing. It's me outside of those things with an impression that I get.
Right.
So that's the point, really, that they are perhaps even my sort of fantasias about their faith, you know, being a Buddhist or being a Mormon.
You're not professing to be an expert on these. You're just this.
Oh no, not at all. No expertise whatsoever.
It's just your take. It's just your take.
Yeah, I wasn't brought up anything. My mum was Roman Catholic, but I wasn't brought up Catholic. So I think I inherited a lot of things from my mum, and I think I've got the Catholic guilt. I've got all that. There's something Catholic within me. My dad was atheist. My mum had lapsed in Catholicism and took it up later in her life. And I don't know whether it was a good thing or a bad thing for her, mostly good. But sometimes I don't know if it just added to her pain. I don't know. I sort of followed her journey a bit, and she read a lot about it, and she started going to church again. And I went to see the Pope with her, Pope John Paul.
Okay.
At the time, I was kind of confused and lost, and I thought of taking up the faith as well, but I didn't. But I came near to perhaps beginning to go to, you know, whatever you go to, like the classes and things, and becoming a Catholic, but I didn't do it. And I certainly couldn't envisage doing anything near that now.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, I thought of it.
Yeah. Well,
Flirting with Catholicism.
You brought up your latest release, "Never Give Up on a Song." What's been the reaction to the album?
The reactions are very, very good.
Yeah, good.
Not exactly reflected in the sales or streaming figures. Never Give Up on a Song, I think, is quite an accessible album. It's got songs that are quite immediate, like the title track, which is really just about the creative urge and carrying on. And the ironic thing is, I have given up on a song. You know, I've totally given up at times, you know, and it was my way of urging myself on. And it's got songs, you know, it's got songs about things like Green City Bird Cathedral I like a lot, which is a kind of quite topical song about trees and the ecology, and the gold-plated song about the Mormon sisters. Wendy O about Wendy O. Williams.
Really? Yeah, yeah.
It's an album with a lot of songs with subjects and stories, and they're kind of like, again, me adapting things to the way I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm.
The 70-Year Itch is about my fears of what I would call broadly a fascist type thing coming back into the world, and that we never quite lose that. And that having been through what we went through in history with the, you know, Second World War and that surely it's to be avoided again. But sadly, that undercurrent is there. And there's a song there, My Turn for a Miracle, which is about my granddad, Hewick, who fought in World War I and was wounded in the Battle of the Somme.
Mm-hmm.
And he was actually in a trench with 11 men, and the shell landed in there, and he and one other guy survived. The other 9 fellas were killed.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty horrific. And that's the miracle. That's what I say, My Turn for a Miracle, because how he survived it, never know. Because he actually got a fragment of shell in his head, and he could show you the scar. He could notice I've got no hair. My granddad had a great head of hair, and he lived to 90, but he could lift up the fringe of his hair and show you the scar where the shell had hit. And had it gone a fraction more in, of course, it would have killed him. It would have got his brain and killed him. But he survived.
So anyway, I know we're running a little bit long here, but talk about briefly what's on the horizon for Kevin Hewick as far as music goes and everything.
Well, I kind of just carry on and do things. I mean, none of it is as organized as I wish. None of it is as ongoing as I wish. I'm trying to get projects going with other musicians, and some haven't taken off. A couple of collaborative band projects that, I mean, there's one in particular I hope will go somewhere in 2023 that would put me more in a kind of a rock, even metal setting, but it hasn't took off yet. I play in another band called Multimorph. It's kind of like a psychedelic jam band. But Multimorph, we only do about 4 gigs a year. We play the solstices. So we're doing Winter Solstice on December 28th, and mostly they're local or not far from here. And I've got obviously I need to, there's no exciting spin on that. It's like, if it was a newspaper headline, it would say man makes album.
Mm-hmm.
The big thing I've got to do is make my next album. A lot of it's written, a lot of it's happening. And what can I say? A new album will appear next year. I mean, but that sounds so vague and unexciting to anybody else. But the big thing is I will be working on a new album. I'm working on projects and collaborations. I've been working quite a lot with a keyboard player called Lee Spreadbury, and he'll be featured quite a lot on the next album. And Lee and I have done some shows together with him on keyboards and me on guitar. So things like that, which perhaps doesn't sound that exciting. I would like to play live far more. I'd like to reach far more, but nobody knows who I am. I'm so obscure that, to be honest, I want to go to other cities, other countries. I mean, I've played around Europe, not for quite a few years, but I've done quite a few shows in Europe over the years. And I'd love to do more.
Mm-hmm.
But it's being known and having any kind of audience. And I'm somebody. I'll play places without a mic and just a guitar to a few people in a room, like the room you're sitting in now or something. You know, I'd do anything if people are interested. But of course, if they're not interested, it's pretty boring for them, isn't it? But I've been playing in things like coffee shops and things like that, like the old folkies used to.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm doing a thing in December that I do a couple of times a year, Melton Mowbray near Leicester. It's Melton Mowbray Festival, and you play in bars and cafes and things, and you do 3 or 4 shows a day. It's like doing a tour, but it's all in Melton Mowbray. It's all over a couple of days.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll probably do about 6, 7, 8 40-minute sets.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot of playing. I mean, you imagine if you do 4 40-minute sets, you know, that's 160 minutes of music in one day in 4 different places.
Mm-hmm.
And that's on December 10th and 11th. And I'm really looking forward to that, because I debut a lot of new material. I'm always writing, and I've got so many songs unfinished at the minute. I'm pushing myself to finish a couple, to play them and include them on the next album. That sounds like anybody, doesn't it? But that's the level I work on. But I've got a couple of gigs next year. I'm doing one with Richard Strange, Doctors of Madness. I've worked with Richard a bit before.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm doing another one or two with Section 25. Amazingly, the first show Section 25 and I did together was February the 7th, 1980. And of course, me and Vin Cassidy feel it's amazing. It would be, so that will be 43 years later. We played in London in June, so 42 years later. So next year will be 43 years since we did our first show together. So that is amazing.
That is. That's
just that Larry isn't there to be with us, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish Paul Wiggin was there, though I'm in touch with Paul Wiggin a lot, because the original Section 25 I played with was Paul Wiggin, Larry Cassidy, and Vin Cassidy.
Mm-hmm.
So Larry's with us in spirit. Paul's with us in spirit and communication. I mean, I last heard from Paul yesterday, so I'm in touch with Paul quite a lot, which is great. But so you know, it's all ongoing. So the main thing is there will be another album next year. I've got to make it yet, but it's happening. And then no doubt it will go into total obscurity like everything else I've done. It's a body of work, and I mean, I'm of an age where each album you do could be the last one. I mean, anybody could say that. Somebody aged 19 could make an album, and they could, I don't know, something tragic could happen to their health or whatever. So life is like that. Nobody knows, do they?
No.
So you can be very young and you know, but obviously I'm at an age where realistically you are I want to carry on into my 70s and 80s if I'm granted the grace to do that. I will. So would there be a Kevin Hewick album in 10 years time? Yes, if I'm still around.
will there be a Kevin Hewick in 20 years' time? Yes, if I'm still around, and maybe then I'll be pushing it. But I'd like to be like Pete Seeger, you know. I think Pete Seeger carried on till he was 93, and he did his last album at 92 or something. So I'd like to be like Pete Seeger, but probably not. But Pete Seeger managed it, so who knows?
Right. Or it could be one of those 1,000 albums you must hear after you die. You know?
Very good. I love that song. That's a really good song. And I thought, yeah, they say before you die, but I said 1,000 albums you hear after you die. That's really interesting. That's even more interesting.
Well, I appreciate it, Kevin. Thank you for your time. And
great talking to you, Greg. Thank you so much. It's been lovely. Keep in touch.
Yes, I will. And best of luck in all your future endeavors and in life.
Thank you. It's been lovely talking to you. Thank you.
Yeah. Now go give Smokey a walk. Yeah.
Smokey is sitting here literally at my feet. So he's playing the guilt trip at the minute. Right. So we've got to get out there. Got to get that lead and get out on the street. Yeah. Thank you then. You take care.
All right. Thank you, Kevin.
Soon. Keep in touch.
All righty.
Bye.